Welcome back. I'm Jen Potter, the host of The Wow Within, where we meet with authors and writers to talk about the story that's inside of us. There's a story inside of everyone that we really want to tell. Today, I am joined with Sarah Elizabeth. She is talking about a new book that she recently wrote in 2024, where she talks about her journey going through life and the expectations of others and finally finding the path to herself. And we all have been through a different part of our lives with isolation and expectations and trying to fit into the molds that we don't necessarily know how to fit into and to meet other people's expectations, myself included. And that feeling of not being able to be our true authentic self sometimes is really, really difficult for us. And over time we get to a point where we really want to be the person that we are inside. And when we start to do that, it's really hard for people that are used to being around us, where we're always listening to this internal dialogue, but not necessarily talking about it on the outside. And when we get to a point in our lives where we're ready to tell the world who we are, show our true authentic self, it can be a little scary because we're finally saying, hey, this is really who I am. And people that are around us don't necessarily understand what that's like because they've seen just one side of us. But we're finally ready to show all of the sides. And that's exactly what Sarah did. She put herself out there, she made herself vulnerable, she started talking about her journey and everything that she's gone through. And one of the things that we talked about during the break was that we both have kids with different abilities. And I'm a firm believer that my children altogether, but especially my son, he has made me the person that I am. He has taught me patience, just like we talked about, Sarah, and has really forced me to be able to push myself to that next level. So I want to bring Sarah back on and I want to talk a little bit about, how that has helped to shape and change your perspective because, when we have kids with different abilities, we have to be able to see the world through their eyes. And I think that that is what really changed my perspective on so many things is seeing the world through my children's eyes, especially my son who has to deal with, seeing the world a little differently.
I agree completely. And I will say in full disclosure, when I first was becoming a mom, I thought that I was going to have it all figured out. I thought I would have all the answers. I thought my children would look to me as, the be all and end all of all the wisdom of the world. I just really thought that I would know what I was doing when I got to this point. And, I would say my cracks started when my daughter was born and she came into this world not necessarily planned. I had to have an unplanned C-section. And right there, I was like, oh my gosh, I am totally not in control in this environment. And then when I was pregnant with my second, I thought, this is great. I have a toddler. I know what I'm doing. And my little guy was born. And a few years into his life, we found that he was level one autistic. And having those two babies in my world completely opened up a new perspective. It really forced me to look at life through their lens and not necessarily try and impart what I thought life should be like, but really allow them to be who they are. And when you're raising a child with special needs or differing needs, especially when there's a neurodivergence involved, the more you try and force them into your world, the more they push you away and reject what you're trying to do. And, I think that they're such a gift to all of us because they force us to open our eyes and see life in a way that maybe we should be seeing it. I share a story in my book about how I was at the school drop off and my daughter was in the front seat and she saw this truck in front of us that was plastered with bumper stickers that should not be on school grounds by any stretch. And she and I were both scared that my son was going to read them from the back seat, have them memorized in a half a second, and walk into school saying all of these things that were awful. And, my ex husband once told me, he said, Sarah, you can't change the world for Joey. And I thought, I can't change it, but maybe I can start saying, is this really the world that we want to raise our children in? I think they have challenged me to try and say, who do I want to be as a person and as a role model? And what type of world do I want to help create so that children can thrive and not deal with all of the stressors that we've had to grow up with?
Right. And, you're absolutely right when you say we can't control, the outside world, but we can control, the things that are within our hands and, our perspectives. And, even the things that I say to my own children, I'll say something to them about, someone will say something to them. And I always tell them, I'm like, don't react. You have the opportunity to continue to do what you're doing and don't react. The amount of patience and less reactivity that I have personally gone through, and my background, I tell everyone I have a very reactive nationality, and so like the first thing that I want to do is like I want to react, like it's my natural, like with everything I'm just like stop and take it back and just be patient and just not react, but give the other person the opportunity or that outside force. And it's so hard as a parent, never mind a parent who has a kid with a different ability, and being able to educate and not react has been one of the hardest lessons that I personally had to learn. But I also think, just like you said, with your journey and that outside expectation, I feel like it ties it all together, because being able to change your way of thinking, you've had to do it all the way around, not just with you personally, but with your relationships and with your children. And when you start to change that focus, it also starts to change, how other people view you. And that's beautiful.
Yes, I think it's teaching us tolerance, right? Right within our own homes. If I can't
Mhm.
control my emotions and my response to my child, how am I going to be able to be tolerant when I go out into the world, and vice versa? I think as parents, we're still those role models. So if we're driving in the car and we completely lose our patience, or if we're insensitive at the grocery store and rush through and don't pause to say, "Can I help you?" or "You look beautiful," or you know anything that we can do just to show that compassionate side of human beings, they're like little sponges and absorbing that for us. So I think it really goes both ways. While they're teaching us tolerance, compassion, patience, we have that opportunity to take that lesson and then emulate it, not just when we're telling them what to do, but into our everyday approach of how we live our own lives.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's, you know, one of the things I took into consideration when I told my story or started to tell my story is my kids are going to read this someday. And I want them to be able to look back and go, this is what mom went through. This is, and to teach them something. And I think for us opening ourselves up and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, we're also teaching our kids how to be vulnerable at an earlier age. I mean, we didn't learn till we were in our late 30s, early
Right.
40s, right?
Yes.
Like I talk about things sometimes and I'm like, I didn't start doing that till like 2 years ago.
Mhm.
And but there are things that my 12-year-old is doing that I never had the confidence to do. And I think we're being able to teach this next generation that, you don't have to stuff it all in, because I think our generation, I mean, from my perspective personally, was, oh, you have a problem, push it down a little bit further. Don't talk about it. There, Miranda Lambert made a song about it, keep your lips shut, don't say anything. And every time I hear that song, I cringe. And I was like, no, that's not it. Like, that's not the right message that we want to send to our children. We want to be able to talk about those things, express our vulnerabilities. And I think allowing yourself to be vulnerable and talk about your story and talk about your children, it's only teaching our kids that it's okay to have those conversations. And as well as other people that are our age, both men and women. And everyone's reading that story going, okay, it's not just me. And you might be able to get one person to open up and tell their story, because when one person comes to you, and I'm sure that they already have, and they're like, I was able to tell my story because I read your book. And that one person, I'm like, I bawled the first time that happened. And every time you make that impact on someone, you realize you're like, all right, this is the reason why I did what I did.
Yeah, ultimately, I just want to create a safe space where people can choose to be vulnerable. I think that that's really the only way that as a society or as a culture or, as parents, as women, as mothers, lovers, in any relationship dynamic, having that ability to really let down the walls and give others permission to do the same, and then to raise a generation of kids where being vulnerable and authentic is just the natural part of who they are, that will be probably the biggest gift that I could get out of this journey that I've been on so far.
And I think that that's amazing, and that's exactly what you strive for in your book, and you're already seeing it come to fruition. And by creating this safe space, allowing others to do the same. And I hope as you continue through this journey and speaking more on stage and speaking more on podcasts, that you're able to continue to tell this mission and tell your story, because it is beautiful. Like I said, 20 minutes in, I'm like, I have to send you a text message and I have to tell you, like, I'm sucked into the story because I felt every inch of it. So if you haven't read it, you got to get the book. Tell everyone how they can get the book, how they can get a hold of you, and all the things.
Sure. So it is available on Amazon, also on Barnes and Noble. I do have a website. It's www.sarahelizabeth.icu. And you can find me on Facebook at Beautifully Free, Entirely Capable. That's where I post most of my daily musings as I continue on this journey of life. But I hope you enjoy it. And I look forward to hearing everybody's thoughts on it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing a part of your journey and being on the show today. I look forward to having you again soon and working with you on other endeavors. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, that wraps up our Wow Within. Thank you so much for joining us for our first episode. We really hope that you enjoyed it and that you stick around to find the wow within you.
This has been a Now Media Networks feature presentation. All rights reserved.